Hello and welcome to our first webinar coffee break of 2021. We're going to be talking about the how of leadership, which is something that here at Karrikins Group we are so passionate about. I'm Julie Williamson and I'm our Chief Growth Enabler. Really, the way that we spend our days is working with executive teams to help them accelerate their strategies and really live their purpose or mission or vision by thinking about how they lead together rather than how they lead individual areas of the business in disconnected ways. For us, it's our highest order calling, and we're really excited to be able to share a little bit with you about how we think about the how of leadership as we go into 2021, because it's such a great time here in January to be thinking about where do you want to go with your strategy in the coming year. As we get really going into this new year, there are so many disruptions that we came through. 2020 was such a doozy. It was such a year. And we learned a lot of new ways of working. We learned some great things about ourselves and about our organizations and about our customers. We want to make sure we leverage all of those as we think about how we're going to lead going into 2021. So I'm really excited that you're here for this coffee break with us. It's going to be short. It's going to be interactive. We're going to talk about some really powerful ideas that you can take forward with your team. Before we get started though, I'd love to just hear a little bit about who we have on the call. And I want to just ask you to raise your hand and let me know if in your organization right now you have a purpose or a mission or a vision that's defined and well articulated for your organization. Maybe you have all three, maybe you have some subset of those, but do you have anything that really articulates why you do what you do, that higher order calling? And just raise your hand. I'm going to take a look and see who's raising their hand. We've got a lot of people. It looks like almost everybody has a defined purpose, mission, vision, something in that space. And that's very common today. In the last 20 or 30 years, many organizations have invested in developing a powerful why. They want to be able to tell their customers, their potential employees, their investors why they're doing what they're doing and what that higher order calling looks like. So having that well-defined and consistent across your organization is great. And a lot of organizations are using that as well for some of their marketing and branding materials. All right, let's take a look at what it is that you do. Raise your hand if you have a clearly defined strategy that you think everybody in the organization knows and understands. So a strategy, it might also be initiatives or priorities or plans. Is there something out there that really helps people know what it is that you want to do? Go ahead and raise your hand if you feel like in your organization that's really clear and it's something that people would consistently reference or articulate. And let's take a look at who's raising their hand. All right, not as many people with that clarity around the what. Again, that's not uncommon, but a lot of organizations are investing and have been investing for the past about 50 years in really having a clearly articulated strategy. Sometimes that strategy is a little closely held with the executive leadership. It's not usually used as a marketing or employee brand grounding point. And so that's something that typically is not necessarily as well distributed or as well articulated, but it really should be. Should be something that most of the people in your organization know and understand, and they know what it is that they're focused on as they move forward. So knowing your why and your what is really an important part of leadership, and that's part of why how fits in so nicely. One of the things that we know at Karrikins Group is that the most inspiring why and the most ambitious what will fail if you don't have a well-defined how. How are you going to execute on that as a team of leaders in the organization? What happens is people just go off and do whatever it is they think they need to do in their own areas in order to bring the why and the what to life. And when it's not coordinated with a clearly defined how, we find that you just simply don't get the value out of those two really critical pieces of your organization. So that's what led us to create the diamond triangle. And the diamond triangle is Karrikins Group's way of really talking about the space between your why and your what being that how. So within the diamond triangle, it's important to know your why, it's important to know your what, and then you want to be able to equally well articulate your how. How are you going to lead together? Now, before the webinar today, you would have received our diamond triangle canvas in email. I'd really encourage you to open it up and take a look at it. It has some great questions that you can ask yourself and your colleagues about what's in our why, what's our what, what's our how do we really articulate that? So you might find some interesting differences around how people articulate those three really critically important things. What we're here to talk about in this coffee break, though, is the how. So the why, again, a lot of organizations have invested. They've got that clarified. The what, again, there's a lot of effort. You do your strategy offsites every year. Maybe you get your people together on a quarterly basis to review. But strategy is usually something that companies are pretty articulate in as well. And how often is that missing piece? So one question that we often get asked is, why is the how left undefined? Why is that the missing piece? And for us, there are a couple of really critical reasons. One is that the ambiguity of not knowing exactly how we're going to work together is useful for people who want to protect the status quo. So if everybody's pretty comfortable knowing how to lead within their vertical, and they can really deliver on that effectively, leaving how do we lead horizontally ambiguous actually helps people to protect that status quo. It can also feel a little messy, a little high on the level of ambiguity, and so, or the level of abstraction, excuse me. So when we leave it really abstract, one of the things we hear from people is it's very hard to measure. And what gets measured gets done is a famous saying in business. I would suggest to you, though, that often what gets measured gets manipulated. People are typically able to deliver on the things that they're being measured on, no matter how aligned that delivery mechanism might be to the why and the what. So you have to be a little careful about depending too much on visible and quantitative measurements, because what gets measured doesn't always get done right. So the how helps you to make sure that what you're measuring is being done in a way that's consistent with your why and your what, and it's being done consistently across the organization. When you get really clear about that how, you fill in that space. So we want to bring it down on the ladder of abstraction, make it more visible, make it something that you can appropriately see and understand, even if it can't be held to quantitative measures. We want to make sure that it's not so ambiguous that it literally protects the status quo. I'm curious, there's probably also some other reasons from folks on the call that you can think of about why in your organization you don't have a defined how. So let's just see in the chat. And in the chat, by the way, if you just change the panelist to everyone, we'll all be able to participate in the chat. And I'm just going to give you a minute to think about why in your organization might the how be undefined, about how you're going to lead across the organization as a team of leaders. What leaves it undefined? And I'm going to take a look at the chat over here. And I see, a couple people are saying our third item here on the slide, which is it can feel like it takes too much time because it requires collaboration. It requires being in conversation with people across the organization. And people say, well, I just don't have the time to do that. I don't have the time to check in on what other people are doing. I would suggest to you that if you repurpose some of the time that you might be spending now in less productive status meetings, you might be able to collaborate and connect more effectively and actually have that how of leadership around how you're leading across the organization become much more effective. So just kind of some food for thought. Let's see what else we've got out there. Yeah, it feels hard. It does feel really hard, doesn't it? And it can also, I see a couple people talking about losing power and control. Definitely when you start to lead as a team of leaders, you start to realize that you don't have full autonomy in your decision making because you have to stay in alignment to what you've committed to the rest of the team. Sometimes you have to put the good of the organization in front of the good of a particular vertical line of business or functional area. That can be very, very confronting as a leader, especially if you're someone who's really used to always making your bogey, kind of always hitting those metrics. And you know how to do that when you're working in isolation. It can become much harder to do it when you're working horizontally. So there's a few good ideas out there. Those are some of the ones I see popping up. But let's keep going and let's start to talk about if these are the things that leave the how undefined, how can you step into that space and how might you be able to define the how within your organization? So here at Karrikins Group, we do what we call journey work. We take you on a whole journey where we help the leadership team really get clear and articulate about their how. But if you want to give it a try in your own organization, there are a few steps to think about. One is with the canvas, again, that we sent out. So be sure to check that out. It's a great resource for you, and it'll just get you started. It'll get you kind of thinking about some of the things that we're talking about here today. There are a few other things, though, that I want to make sure that you're thinking about. One is you have to be willing to say what's unsaid. You have to be willing to have the conversations in the room that often happen outside of the room. When we work with senior executives, I can't tell you how often in our one-on-one interviews, somebody will say to us, you know what's really the problem around here? We have all these meetings outside of the room, but nobody's willing to have the conversation in the room. So it takes courage. It takes the ability to step into that space and be willing to have the conversation in the room to say what's often being unsaid. So again, finding that connection to other leaders in the organization can be really challenging, but that's where some of the secret sauce in knowing how you're going to work together, how you're going to lead together exists, is in what's unsaid today. So something to think about there. The second is to make sure that you're making the invisible visible. And the invisible are the group dynamics that are happening across the team. So if you walk into status meeting or like a weekly or maybe a monthly meeting with the CEO and his or her direct reports, and you look around the table, you might see people sitting like this. Or you might see people on their devices kind of doing something here. Or maybe they're not making eye contact. Or there's somebody who's always very loud in the room and kind of controls the time. Or there might be two people who are whispering over in the corner together. Those are all group dynamics, and they often are allowed simply to be invisible. When we define how we want to lead together, we start to make those group dynamics visible. We bring the invisible, make it visible, and start to talk about it so that we can work differently together. Another thing that sits in that invisible space are mindsets, beliefs, assumptions that we're making about each other and also about the strategy that we're trying to develop or implement. So what might be an individual mindset that gets in the way of something that's happening in the room or in the organization, or the way that you're making decisions, the behaviors that you're exhibiting as a leader? Those are all invisible, and we've got to bring them forward and make them visible. Third is it's really important to co-create the how with the people who need to be delivering on it. Now, oftentimes we see mission, vision, purpose, those sorts of things a bit crowdsourced, maybe from employees, get their input, and then maybe the marketing team goes off and finalizes it, or the HR team or the culture group, something like that. It gets a little outsourced by the executive team. Strategy also can tend to be in a strategy group, or it gets deferred to a small handful of leaders in the organization. And that's okay for your why and your what. But when we're talking about how you intend to lead together, the leaders who have to show up that way are the ones that have to co-create that outcome. So that's why in our work, we work a lot with CEOs and their direct reports, so as executive teams, or leaders of P&Ls and their direct reports. So it's always about how do we get the right people in the room to co-create the how, because you cannot tell somebody else how to work. They have to align themselves to that behavior. So it's really important for them to be a part of the process. And then finally, it's getting to the right stuff. And I've alluded to some of the right stuff already. When we talk about the right stuff at Karrikins Group, we're talking about the behaviors and the decision-making that happens that drives outcomes in the organization. And we use our behavior model to really help articulate that. In our behavior model, what you'll see, what you'll see in our behavior model is that on the far right, there are outcomes. And those outcomes are driven by decisions and behaviors that leaders are exhibiting every single day. It is phenomenal how many of our decisions and behaviors are on autopilot. If you think about driving home and how often you can drive home and not remember what happened from when you left the parking lot until you pulled into your garage, because you're just on autopilot. You're making all sorts of decisions on that drive, but you're so deeply habituated that you don't even think about it. Have you ever gotten up in the morning, made yourself a cup of coffee, and then you don't even remember really making the coffee? Because again, you were just on that autopilot mode. That happens a lot in organizations, and it happens when we're making even some very significant decisions about our businesses. So we want to change the outcomes by changing decisions and behaviors. And that means we have to understand the trade-offs that we're constantly making in our organizations. Those trade-offs are incredibly powerful. Here's an example of a trade-off: short-term return and long-term investment. People are making those trade-offs all the time. There are no right answers to trade-offs. They're a continual debate. We always have to struggle with them. Here's another common trade-off that we hear: operational effectiveness or operational consistency and innovation. Innovation is by definition a little messy, a little unpredictable. The results aren't always dialed in. But if you work in an organization that really values operational precision and diligence and repeatability, it can be very hard to be innovative. So that trade-off that you're constantly making between maintaining predictability and being innovative and creative is a trade-off that organizations and leaders grapple with all the time. But it leads directly to the outcomes that you get at the end of the day. So what drives trade-offs? What creates trade-offs? Trade-offs are fed by individual mindsets, group dynamics, and organizational factors. So we think about the assumptions that we bring in, the beliefs, those are all in your individual mindsets. They tangle together with the group dynamics. How does this group tend to work? And then the organizational factors. What's the power structure? What are the timelines on which we have to work things? What's our calendar? What's our meeting cadence? What's our process? All of those things come together and inform the trade-offs that we're making every single day. Those drive our decisions and behaviors, which drive outcomes. If we bring this down into an individual perspective, or really think about how as people we exhibit these kinds of behaviors, think about something as simple in January as Dry January. Many people all around the world participate in Dry January. It's become quite a trend, kind of like get back on track, start the year right, start the year with a fresh look. Well, by about January 3rd or 4th, many people have dropped out of Dry January. And that's in part because we're so deeply habituated in how we interact with our friends, how we interact with our families, kind of how we show up in our own lives. And so our individual mindsets, beliefs are going to come together with group dynamics. How do we normally behave in a group setting? So if we're going out for drinks with friends, we're probably going to have a drink instead of soda water. If we're going to have a nice meal with a spouse or a date, you might want to have a glass of wine with that. So those are kind of those interactive pieces that drive our behaviors. And then organizational factors would be: how readily accessible is it? Do you have a wine cellar that you like to tap into? Is there beer in the fridge? All of these things come together to make Dry January very difficult to achieve. So you might know what you want to do, but you don't yet know how you're going to do it. Getting clear for yourself about how to really step into something like a commitment like Dry January or any other New Year's resolution that you might have set comes into understanding your mindsets, group dynamics, and organizational factors. It's the same thing for a leadership team, only exponentially more complex, because you're trying to get everybody into alignment about how we're going to work together. So if you want to change the outcomes in your organization, you've got to change the leader behaviors and decision-making processes. And then that means understanding the trade-offs that the people around the executive room are making every single day, and understanding what feeds into those trade-offs as effectively as possible. So getting this whole big picture well understood, making the invisible visible, saying what's left unsaid, co-creating these behaviors and decisions that you most want to see, that's really where the magic is in filling in the how in your diamond triangle. So you can know why you want to do what you do, you can know what you're going to do, but until you know how, it's going to be very challenging. It's going to be just as challenging as sticking with any of your New Year's resolutions. So something to think about. When you get into this behavior model, it's really important, again, to bring other people into the conversation. This is not something that you can do on your own. You can't define how we're going to lead together by going and writing down a list of rules and regulations for people to follow. It has to be something that you do in conjunction with the other leaders in your organization. So again, the diamond triangle, you know your why, you know your what. Let's get to know your how. Make that something you're going to do for 2021. You're going to lean in and you're going to figure out how are we going to work together to deliver on our most aspirational why and our most ambitious what. And how are we going to do that together as a team? Here at Karrikins Group, we really believe that this is the missing piece for many organizations. If we can find the language for the how, then we can start to change outcomes for the organization in really remarkable ways, because we're going to be able to influence the decisions and behaviors that people exhibit by understanding the trade-offs that are being made every single day and what feeds into those trade-offs in terms of individual mindsets, group dynamics, and organizational factors. So with that, we're going to bring this to a close. I just want to give you a couple of things to think about as you take it forward. One is we're going to send you a follow-up PDF with a summary of some of the things we've talked about here today. You've got the Canvas as well that should have come in your email today. We'll send it out to you as well. And there'll be a recording of this posted on our website shortly that you can use as a reference point as well. Thank you all so much for participating. We really appreciate it. I hope your 2021 is off to a great start, and I hope your January resolutions are all holding firm as you go forward. If not, remember that you can check out our behavior model for yourself as well. It works for personal commitment as well as for leadership commitment. Enjoy and have a great 2021.